Welcome to the Lend Academy podcast, episode number 235. This is your host, Peter Renton, founder of Lend Academy and co-founder of the Lend It Fintech Conference. Today's episode is sponsored by Lend It Fintech USA, the world's largest fintech event dedicated to lending and digital banking. It's happening on May 13th and 14th at the Javits Center in New York City. Lending and banking are converging, and Lend It Fintech immerses you in the most important trends of the day. Meet the people who matter, learn from the experts, and get business done. Lend It Fintech, lending and banking connected. Go to lendit.com/USA to register. Today on the show, I'm delighted to welcome David Brear. He is the CEO and founder of 11FS. Now, you may know 11FS from their podcast series. That's how I got to know them. They also had a very popular video that was out late last year. But they are so much more than a media company. They are doing all kinds of things, including providing, banking infrastructure and consulting. And they have a product where they record user journeys from different fintech companies and banks and all kinds of technology companies all over the world, which we talk about. We talk about all those sort of things. We talk about what's wrong with banking today, what banking is going to look like in the future, and much more. It was a fascinating interview. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the podcast, David.
Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. So I'd like to get these things started by giving the listeners some background. And you've had an interesting career, spent a lot of time in banking. It seems like digital banking has been something you've been focused on for some time. So why don't you give the listeners some of the highlights on what you've done today?
Yeah, banking was very much my second love, unfortunately, rather than my first love. I sort of grew up very much kind of emphasis on playing sports and running around, really. So unfortunately, after a career-ending injury, so all three ligaments of my left knee, I had to get a proper job. So really surveying what was the most interesting space sort of 20 years out, then I was looking at either oil and gas, which seemed a bit unsustainable, or the technology industry, or financial services. So being a bit of a greedy gut, so I sort of plumbed for two out of the three. So went into the computing side of things and then started on a bit of a safari around financial services. So myself, personally, I've worked in big banks, big insurers, big management consultancies, Indian offshoring companies. And really, that all leads me to believe that digital banking is really only 1% finished. Mm-hmm. With all of the changes that we've seen when it comes to technology and everything that's actually happening in the lateral industries, resetting what customers' expectations is, then actually there's so much more in this journey really to go. So hopefully we'll start to see a lot more real innovation coming through. We argue, in all honesty, I don't think we've actually seen digital banking yet. It's this thing out on the horizon. We've seen digitized banking. We've seen people take very much what they've got in the analog world and sort of dumb it down for distribution through digital channels. But it really doesn't mean the same as what truly digital really is. Right. So for me, that's what we do today. We're helping people bring about that change.
Okay, so we'll get into more of that in a bit, but I wanted to just give the listeners the founding story of 11FS. Like, how did you guys get together? What were you trying to achieve? Just tell us all about how that came to be.
Yeah, sure. So back in, the 11FS is nearly 4 years old now, so 4 in April. So really, I had a kind of always an inkling that I'd go and do something, go and build a thing, but I needed enough knowledge to actually go and make that happen. I think so many people get really preoccupied with being an entrepreneur and starting a business that they often do it before they really, really can actually make that type of change happen, mm-hmm. or even to the point where they've got a sustainable model around them that actually is not only from a financial perspective, but just from a network perspective in terms of the people that you bring in. So for me, after working in all those angles of financial services, I thought, you know what, I think there's probably a better way now. The industry is at a real inflection point. And actually over the next 10 years, I really feel like the whole fabric of financial services will be changed, whether it's the technology, whether it's the fundamental structure, the operating capability, even the competitors that are in the space. I think what it actually means to be a financial services company in 2020 is really up for grabs. So for me, that's the most exciting thing. At that point, I was like, well, if the whole world is changing, then actually we should try and bring about some of that change and really shape what that means and shape what happens in the industry. So we founded 11FS, and actually I still stand by the hardest thing was really the beginning. Actually, once you've started something successful, then the momentum behind it is really sort of magnetic. It continues to draw in interesting things and draw in interesting people. But going from leaving Gartner, where I was running their global digital banking practice, to actually getting other people who believed what I believed was really, an interesting challenge. But join they did. I had Jason Bates join, who was co-founder of Monzo before this. Simon Taylor joined, who previously was running the blockchain R&D division at Barclays Bank. And also Ross Methvin, who was previously running the research practice at a research house called Mapper. So, having the merry band together and sitting in a Starbucks as many a good startup story begins, we sort of began on, well, if we believe that the fabric of financial services is changing, then how do we have the impact that we want to? And, fast forward 3 years and 3.75 years, and we just tipped over 180 people. We've built out brand new greenfield banks all over the planet. We're building out products for ourselves, and have a lot of good fun while we're doing it as well.
Okay, well, I want to sort of dig into the different things, because you have a lot of components to your business, and I got to know you from your podcast that I've been listening to now for many years, and it's an excellent show, and I'll link to it in the show notes here. But why don't you just describe the different components, maybe just quickly a summary of the different components, and then we'll dig into each one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we really focused within 11FS on culture and talent. I honestly think they're the only two things that really, really matter in this world. If you have the right talent and you unlock that potential, you unleash that potential with the right culture, then whatever we sort of place that emphasis, we shine that light on, we can do better than anybody else. And for us, that really sort of breaks down into two main areas of the business, which is we have a services business where we are working with people to define what it is that they should be doing, and then actually put that into action, whether it's building a brand new greenfield organization in the US, or whether it's building a brand new thing over in Hong Kong. It's really not just about PowerPoint and what the idea should be. This isn't a strategy. This is about execution. So how do you put in place the right product? How do you put in place the right designers, the right engineers, even down to how do you create a new age of really what service actually is? And then on the other hand of the business, what we're doing is we're building products that actually help people make that journey more efficient. So we have two of them that are in the market right now, but we're working on many more. One of them is called 11FS Pulse, which is a global benchmarking tool. I actually had the idea for this back when I was working at Lloyds Banking Group, because I got really frustrated with people basically having this process called ideation at the beginning of all of their projects, which to me was essentially just them figuring out the knowledge that they should know to do the work for us in the first place. So for us, what Pulse is it's a global benchmarking tool. You can go in like you do with Netflix, type in any fintech or any bank on the planet, and play back the actual experiences that they give to their consumers. Because why start with a blank sheet of paper? Why not start where the best is left off? The other product that we have is called 11FS Foundry. This is what we really believe, if you built a technology stack from today, with all of the advancements, with all of the commoditization around technology in both the cloud space, the data space, and even actually collapsing the monoliths that many organizations have down to single engines, what would that look like and what would it be? And that's what we've set out to do with a partnership actually with the biggest bank in Norway. We are building out with Foundry really a network of networks. It's about how do we pull together organizations to really fix the problem that they all have, which is legacy technology.
So would you say that's the biggest problem with banking today, particularly with the larger banks? Is it mean, maybe before we dig into those pieces there, I'm just curious to sort of, given your time, obviously at a large bank and consulting at large banks, is it technology is the issue, or is there something deeper?
Honestly, I think, if you ask any big bank, middle management will say it's regulatory, middle management will say it's technological, but fundamentally it's cultural. If you look at any organization globally of a good scale, the reason why they cannot deliver the things that they want to deliver comes down to not what they want to do, but fundamentally the way in which they do it. I think if you look at any organization that has been successful, unfortunately, what happens in many instances is they sort of ossify around the thing that made them successful, which when the market conditions were exactly as they needed them to be was fantastic. But fundamentally, when those market conditions change, then the tactics that you deploy are just fundamentally not the right tactics for the market and the way that they need to be. So, in a world where, not so long ago, Big Bank A only had to worry about Big Bank B or Big Bank C. So nobody really had to do too much to keep up with one another. And the technology that was underpinning these organizations sort of almost created this annual cycle of change, the big transformation, the big campaign that kind of came forward, the billion that was going to be spent to kind of move the company forward. But the reality of the world that we live in today, where fintech has shown that actually, 15 or 20 people who are, highly trained and highly motivated can do more than 5,000 people without that ability, then this is really where big organizations are being shown a better way. Mm-hmm. The advent of fintech, categorically for me, is not really the benefit isn't really about actually, small organizations taking over the big organizations. It's that the big organizations should suddenly have had the option of doing nothing taken away. And because of this, what we're seeing is really big global organizations, really big banks, and even smaller community banks, realizing that actually, if they did what they did 30, 40, 50 years ago, but did it today, they would be in a completely different place than they were before. And many of the work that we take on right now is really sort of focused down in that spot.
Interesting. So then, what about the digital? You talk about the 15 to 20 guys, and some of these digital banks are now getting a lot bigger than that. But how? I'm curious about the impact of these digital banks. Obviously, they're having it's been a wake up call for the banking system. But the thing that I find super interesting is that big banks, despite this, their challenges are very profitable, and yet challenger banks, despite how all their advantages, are not profitable. And how do you sort of juxtapose those two things?
Yeah, we're looking at two things in the same industry at very different points in their life cycle, right? If you would have looked at a Bank of America, two years into their cycle, they would have been in a fundamentally different place as well. They didn't start with 200 different products and 100,000 people doing frontline customer services. They didn't start with the brands that they have today. So for me, really, while fintech is doing an amazing job at acquiring customers. If you look at Chime over in the US, 5 million customers that they have now. So, to think that they're not having an impact, I think is sort of wishful thinking on the bank side of things. But they're definitely not at the point where they're really taking massive chunks out of the revenue models of the biggest banks. Right. Now, that doesn't say that other people are not doing that. Because actually, if you look at, I think in the US market, the biggest threat actually to the top 5 banks is actually outside of industry threat. If you look at, and when I say outside of industry, I don't just mean outside of financial services. I actually mean other financial services players who fundamentally don't offer those products today. If you look at pretty much the strategy that Goldman Sachs is deploying right now is, hey, we've got lots of money. How can we really shake up financial services in the US? Like, how can we deploy our balance sheet with partnerships with, Apple for Apple Card, or with Amazon for lending, or, whoever else has got major distribution plays? Because, the thing that people always hold on to longest, and if, history sort of teaches us anything with the stories of Blockbuster or Kodak or whatever, is fundamentally the thing that people hold on to most is their business models. when you're not protecting a business model, when you're not on the defensive, but fundamentally you're on the offensive, going into new territories and new markets and seeking out new opportunities, then you don't protect your existing margin. You look to attack somebody else's. So for me, actually, the biggest threat definitely within the US market right now is FS players who have a bigger balance sheet, or big non-FS digital players who actually can start using brands and communities of people who fundamentally love what they do to really parlay that into a financial services experience. Mm-hmm. At this stage, pretty much anybody can be a bank, given the regulatory framework and, abstracting those things through, different players in the US market. And at that stage, why would you not get into FS? Why would you not do that and start tapping into some of those revenues?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So I want to just go back and talk about your Pulse product, because I find it fascinating. You've benchmarked all these user journeys in, when I was looking through your website, seeing just about every financial services firm you can think of, and maybe just describe exactly what you did there and how you're able to have like thousands and thousands of user journeys recorded.
Yeah, I mean the sort of piece that really puts a light on this is, banking is incredibly experiential these days. It isn't about a piece of paper that turns up on your doorstep. It's fundamentally the service in which the financial services player creates for you. So for me, actually, the best way, whether you're a designer, you're a product person, you're a strategist within the bank, the best way people can really understand how good they are is actually by understanding how good everybody else is around them. And not only in your geography, but fundamentally, what does best in class look like? And really what Pulse is set out to do is, how can we give the name Pulse? How can we put the fingers of the industry on the pulse? How can it really understand exactly what's happening out there globally, whether it's people in the US learning from what people are doing in China, or understanding really what does super apps do? Everybody's kind of heard of Alipay, but has anybody really ever seen the experiences? Fundamentally, like bizarrely, in some instances, we've got people using Pulse internally to their organization to go and show their internal legal department that actually somebody has not only done the thing that they said wasn't possible, but they've done it in our market, and it's really, really successful. So really, given how experiential banking is today, then really being able to put the insights of what your competitors are really doing in the market at your fingertips definitely sort of shortens those cycles on creating good product internally in organizations, and allows everybody just to kind of step their game up.
Right. And so then how are you technically able to record so many of these user journeys from all over the world?
So we obviously, with everything that we do, community is a massive thing for us at 11FS. And actually, if you look at all of the major hubs from a fintech perspective, we've got a really deep community that works with us to create the content that we need. So for us, it was a natural extension. As I say, the community side of everything that we sort of build out is really, really powerful. So being able to tap into that to generate benefit from them in terms of the financial side of things, in terms of what we can bring to them with that, but then also the sort of import-export model that we use to make sure that actually we can always have people who are really got their fingers on the pulse when it comes to the industry in those changing areas, because, there are things changing weekly, and we, within 72 hours have a new piece of content that's broken somewhere in far-flung places like China or anywhere on the world, to make sure that the people who have Pulse are constantly looking at what's best.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then let's move on to Foundry, which I find also very interesting, that you've been able to, you're not just a consulting firm, but you're actually going and building things. And I've read that you've got this partnership with DNB, which I think is Norway's largest bank. But tell us a little bit about exactly what you're trying to achieve here. Are you looking to displace the Jack Henrys and the Fiservs of the world, or exactly what are you trying to achieve?
Yeah, so really, Foundry we didn't really set out to build. This wasn't our intention to build a core banking system and full stack architecture. We sort of got to the point where we sort of had to. I mean, after building out, a few go-to-market propositions for people, inevitably what turns to is a question over what the strategic platform is and actually what is really needed and what is really required. Our CTO actually at 11FS used to be the CTO of an investment trading firm called Nutmeg in the UK, but before that, actually a really large betting group called Betfair. And actually, Ewan's always quite bemused by how hard financial services is. If you look at betting, he developed the in-play betting capability, which basically will allow 100 million people watching the Super Bowl to get their odds updated to their mobile devices, allowing them to make different bets depending on which way the wind is blowing. And actually, if you can do that in real time and service that type of thing, then the reality of what a loan and a mortgage and a credit card is relatively straightforward. So for him, actually, what we've done with Foundry, off the back of going into a number of different banks around the world and going, look, if your aspiration is to create, intelligent digital services, if you really want to deliver services and things that are fundamentally compelling in your market, then the incumbent organizations that are providing these things are just not going to get you where you need to. And after drawing the same diagram for everybody, about 20 different times, afterwards we thought, you know what, let's just go build this thing. So we sort of started with an approach of, many people at that stage would have, gone to get £40 million worth of VC money and sort of locked themselves in a basement for 3 years while they were sort of tinkering away. But from my perspective, the only thing that really matters with new technology is that there is trust in that technology and that people are actually using it. So for me, this wasn't an exercise in us building what we thought was best. It was an exercise in actually building something that really met a industry problem. So doing that with a partner was way more beneficial to us than doing it in complete isolation. So the partnerships, we spoke to a few different people, but really loved the DMB guys. They were both the old CEO and actually the new lady who's just taken over, just so culturally aligned to the way in which we work, and actually have such a great aspiration for really where their organization can go. Norway as a country is incredibly digitally savvy. The government has invested in some really, really good digital systems that you can integrate into as well. But really the plan with Foundry is to be in a situation where slice by slice, we replace the existing technology and capability within that organization. And as I sort of said from the get-go, this is really about building a network of networks. I think with SaaS-based systems, what you can allow to do, and actually if you look at some of the incumbent players, this is really where they'll come unstuck, is for everybody on the platform becomes cheaper. For everybody's investment from a license perspective, your ability to develop the platform exponentially grows. And this is very different when you're building SaaS-based systems than when you're building systems that are built to sit in data centers with 25, 30 million upgrade costs every 2 to 3 years. Mm-hmm. The world has just moved on so dramatically. And whether it's cloud-based systems, whether it's microservices architecture, whether it's Kubernetes and Kafka, all of these things allow you to do things in a way that you fundamentally wouldn't be able to do before. Again, this is where, for me, fintechs being born in the digital age rather than digitizing from an analog past, are just setting a completely different standard in terms of what's expected from a technology perspective.
Right. So then what parts, are you eventually going to be working with DNB to replace their entirety of their core banking infrastructure? Are you and where are you on that journey?
Absolutely. This is really about for DNB. They've sort of publicly said this is really about cost efficiencies from their perspective. Doing it cheaper and doing it better is not a thing that is mutually exclusive. So if you can go from a 4-month product review and deployment process to being able to do that in 90 seconds, then that's a really good place from their perspective. We've started with unsecured credit, but we've quickly moved into credit cards and current accounts and being able to then prove the platform, because what we're trying to do is really reduce the complexity in these systems. If you look at actually how many organizations has been created, they've been wildly successful for, a couple of 100 years, acquiring other customers, acquiring other competitors, and to a point where they've got just such a wide array of multiple monoliths in their back office. Mm-hmm. This is really what leads to probably the most worrying thing if you're the CEO of a big bank, which is an OPEX cost that you just can't do anything about. Without major rationalization of the technology that sits within the back office of many of these organizations, they are quite simply never going to be able to compete with the new fintechs coming into the market. We really have Clayton Christensen's innovator's dilemma playing out in front of us over the next 5 years. Can the incumbents really understand innovation and technology quicker than the small, nimble startups and fintechs really attain any level of material scale? And that's the most exciting thing for us. It's we are taking the approaches, the mentalities and methodologies that fintech has brought about, and deploying them against very large scale problems.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So then what about the US market? Obviously, it's the largest market in the world, with maybe the possible exception of China, but certainly in the West, it's the largest market, and many thousands and thousands of banks here, many of them using infrastructure that was built in the 60s and 70s still. So how are you approaching the US market, and do you have clients like DNB already piloting your stuff here?
Absolutely, we do. We are building out something, actually, a retail capability right now that will go to market in Q2 this year. So we will be sort of continuing to sort of expand out. I should say, Foundry very much is about the stage that we're in is very much about the partnerships that we're taking to build it out. So, the network of networks for me, each node in that network is about the partnership that we put in place to really sort of take it to market. So we're in pretty advanced discussions with a few people around the globe that we essentially work in those partnerships to create geographical exclusivity for a period of time. But definitely there's some really interesting conversations happening in Australia. There's some really interesting conversations happening in the US. And we'll have some super interesting news to shout about soon, I'm sure.
Okay, so the partnerships then, are you talking about partnering with other software companies? Because 160 people, 180 people, whatever you said, to completely replace core banking infrastructure it would be challenging. So I imagine that's what it, tell us exactly how it's going to work, where you're not going to just create all the code yourself, it sounds like, but what are you doing it with, partnering with existing suppliers who already have existing relationships in banks?
No, the partnerships that we sort of put in place are predominantly with, big tier one financial services organizations.
Okay.
I think the reality of where we are today, we're just over 180 people, across all of these different divisions. Digital is fundamentally a small team sport. The days of needing 5,000 people to do a thing have died and gone away. And this is really quite a difficult thing for, I think, many of the big incumbent organizations. If something is priced on time and materials, then you would like it to take a lot of time and a lot of materials if you have a lot of materials, right? So, being in that situation where fundamentally the world has shifted, and it's more about having the 15 to 20 people who are best at doing it. And actually, this is really if you look at any fintech player globally right now, they're scaling up, but the areas in which they're scaling up is predominantly not really the engineering side of things that gets, really, really large. It's actually in customer service and customer support. So, even a player like Monzo now in the UK, who has, 4 to 5 million customers, the majority of their employees are customer service. Their engineering practice has scaled, but not to the scale that actually a global bank or a global, more sort of legacy incumbent organization would have done. So, fundamentally, digital is a small team sport. This is about having the best people rather than the most people. And from our perspective, actually, Foundry in itself, with 47 people, I think, within Foundry, has been able to implement into a US organization, have built alongside it with a all of the capability that we're building with DMB, and a third organization in the mix that we're working with as well. So again, it's if you do these things right, if you approach them in the right way, if you have the right talent and you have the right culture, then not only digital but success is very much a small team sport.
So then, do you think there's some of these big banks, UK, US, you name it, around the world. I mean, you're talking thousands, tens of thousands in some cases of software engineers at these companies. Are you saying that's going the way of the dinosaurs, and in a decade or two that they will be vastly smaller in number?
100%. I mean, if you look at any, I mean, I would hope so, but equally, I mean, bureaucracy and governance has a way of existing like you wouldn't believe, right? So if you look at any government office, then actually the level of bureaucracy and governance around processes, again, the sort of ossification around the thing that made them successful in the first place can often just make things a lot harder than they really need to be. So I think very much with the old incumbent organizations, the technology has very much led them to an operating model that expects everything to take forever and cost a lot of money. Most of the time, the hardest thing that we have convincing people is that things don't cost as much or take as long as they really expect it to do. And it's an interesting one. It's almost Stockholm syndrome-esque in terms of, surely we have to do your 5 million PowerPoint presentation, or surely we have to do 6 months of requirements gathering. And the reality of the world, when your technology dictates that everything is difficult and everything takes a long time, then actually, absolutely, you have to be absolutely categorically certain the thing you're doing, the change you're making is right, because it takes you forever, it costs you a huge amount of money, and if you get it wrong, it's really difficult to undo. Mm-hmm. In a world where microservices architecture is in place, and the impact that can have fundamentally on your operating capability, you can implement continuous testing and continuous integration. Your ability to actually make 100 deployments a day is not unheard of. Many of the challenger banks that are really focusing on operational efficiency can do 100 deployments a day to live. They can run a current account for less than 50 cents rather than $200 like a kind of a major bank would do. Right. And this is really where the difference is if everything is a very, very small change, you can afford to be wrong. And when everybody got all excited about fail fast culture, this is really what was meant. It wasn't really about failing fast. It was about failing incredibly small and incredibly inexpensively. It's just that doesn't sell books in the same way. Right.
Gotcha. Okay, we're almost out of time, but before I let you go, a couple more things. We've touched on the podcast, but I also want to touch on the video you guys did late last year, which I thought was excellent. And why did you produce a video? And this video, for people who hasn't, I'll link to it again in the show notes. I mean, it's a professional video. You didn't just do this on an iPhone or whatever. So talk about the video, the history of fintech and 11 years and that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, community is really big for us. It's we're very, very proud of being part of the community, and we're actually really, really proud of what has happened, particularly here in London. Since the financial crisis, the people in place, either it's in the government or the regulator or the Bank of England, have actually done a pretty phenomenal job to create the ecosystem in which we operate today. Many of the fintechs globally actually wouldn't have existed without some really bold moves to create the regulatory setup that we have in the UK with the PRA and the FCA. That actually created a competition mandate for the FCA, which led to fintech really being a thing. It's been emulated now in Hong Kong and Singapore and even into Emirates, over into the US, Australia, all over the world. So for us, many of the people who were really part of that story hadn't been told before. They haven't had that light shone on them to really highlight to a global audience the great work they did to allow everybody in the ecosystem of fintech to do what they do today. So for us, it was about shining a light on the community. It was very much like we do with the podcast. We're very, very lucky to have super, super interesting conversations with people. And really all we want to do with the podcast or the video or anything in that direction is just allow other people to hear that stuff. The more people who can hear interesting conversations or can expand their horizons, the better the whole community will be. So that's what we really set out to do. But if you're interested, it's over on 11years.film. You can watch the whole thing for free. I think we've had about 500,000 people who've watched it now, which is pretty impressive for an hour-long bit of content. But we've had CEOs from Monzo and Revolut and Starling, even people from Barack Obama's administration flew over to take part and talk about really what happened at the points that the administration was really trying to deal with the crisis. So, go over to the website, check that out today.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. It really was. It was far better than I expected when I started watching it. It was a really good show, really well done. So anyway, last question then. What's, we're recording this in mid-February of 2020. What's on tap for 11FS for the rest of this year?
I think I run the company very much like a sports team, if I'm honest with you. So the things that I'm always most excited about are the big summer signings. So we have some really amazing talent inbound. We have some ridiculous talent already in the organization, whether it's Leader or Jason or Sam over in the US or Simon here in the UK as well. But there are 2 or 3 people who are inbounds right now who I'm really, really excited by. Every time we bring somebody in, it brings new opportunity for the organization to do something different. And the people coming in are no different to that. So, look out for those summer signings very shortly.
Okay, we will be on the lookout for that. Well, David, we'll have to leave it there. I very much appreciate you coming on the show today.
No problem at all. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, see ya. Well, David puts forward some very interesting ideas there that digital is a small team sport and that you don't need tens of thousands of software engineers to create something. So it's going to be very interesting to see how big banks adapt. And it's really, this is a decade where it's all going to change, I think. I think you'll find that technology in financial services is going to look extremely different by the end of the decade. And I think, David's vision is one that I agree with and feel like it's inevitable in some ways that you're going to see some very large incumbents that get, that really have a very different look and feel by the end of the decade. We talked about Goldman Sachs, but there's many others out there that are recognizing that they need to change fundamentally. And I think that's what David's getting at. It's not just about putting in some new software. It's about fundamentally rethinking how the business operates. Anyway, on that note, I will sign off. I very much appreciate you listening, and I'll catch you next time. Bye. Today's episode was sponsored by Lendit Fintech USA, the world's largest fintech event dedicated to lending and digital banking. It's happening on May 13th and 14th at the Javits Center in New York City. Lending and banking are converging, and Lendit Fintech immerses you in the most important trends of the day. Meet the people who matter, learn from the experts, and get business done. Lendit Fintech. Lending and banking connected. Go to lendit.com/USA to register.